Hi, future attorneys! Welcome to Decoding the 2025 Bar, where we don't just answer bar questions, we also break down the principles, the logic, and the substance behind them. In this video, we will cover questions 1 to 5 of the 2025 Civil Law Bar Exam. Question number 1. Question number 1 tests your knowledge about the binding effect of contracts on the heirs. Let's just recall the general rule and the exceptions. Our legal basis is Article 1311 of the Civil Code, which states that contracts take effect only between the parties, their assigns, and heirs, except in cases where the rights and obligations arising from the contract are not transmissible by their nature or by stipulation or by provision of law. In other words, contracts entered into by a person bind his or her heirs, unless there's a provision in that contract or in a law prohibiting the transmission of rights and obligations, or the nature of those rights and obligations is strictly or purely personal. Examples of personal agreements are those requiring the exercise of special knowledge, skill, ability, experience, judgment, discretion, or other personal qualifications of one or both parties. If the contract is personal in nature, the contract will be terminated if the party required to render the personal service dies. Conversely, if the contract is not personal in nature, the death of either party will not terminate the contract. Instead, the rights and obligations of the parties to that contract will be transmitted to the heirs or assigns. A contract of lease is an example of a contract that is not personal in nature. This contract does not require the exercise of special knowledge or skill or any personal qualifications on the part of the parties. The primary obligations of the parties include the delivery of the property leased on the part of the lessor and the payment of rent on the part of the lessee. With these, here is my suggested answer. No, C is not correct. Under the Civil Code, heirs are bound by contracts entered into by their predecessors in interest, except when the rights and obligations arising therefrom are not transmissible by their nature, by stipulation, or by provision of law. The Supreme Court has further clarified that the rights and obligations in a contract of lease are not essentially personal in character and are therefore transmissible. Here, C as the sole heir of the lessor A is bound by the latter's contract of lease with B, there being no stipulation or provision of law to the contrary. C's argument that he had nothing to do with the lease contract as it was executed between his father and B is not tenable, as the law itself provides for the effect of contracts upon heirs. Hence, C is not correct. In this answer, I cited both the general rule and the exceptions. But I also formulated a shorter version of this answer, citing only the general rule, since this is what we applied to answer this problem. Here is the shorter version. No, C is not correct. Under the Civil Code, heirs are generally bound by contracts entered into by their predecessors in interest. If the latter dies, the rights and obligations under the contract will be transmitted to the heirs. Here, C as the sole heir of the lessor A is bound by the latter's contract of lease with B. C's argument that he had nothing to do with the lease contract, as it was executed between his father and B, is not tenable, as the law itself provides for the effect of contracts upon heirs. Hence, C is not correct. This short answer is also complete and responsive to the question, since none of the exceptions apply anyway. There is another possible legal basis for this, and that is Article 776 of the Civil Code, which defines inheritance as including all the property, rights, and obligations of a person which are not extinguished by his death. In the case Bute versus Manuel Uy and Sons, the Supreme Court said that the principle of transmission as of the time of the predecessor's death is basic in our civil code. But if I were to choose, would apply the provision under contract law or under the law on succession? Obviously, I chose to use contract law in answering this problem, given that the argument of C is focused on the binding nature of the lease contract upon him as an heir. Question number 2 is about the special contract of agency. Generally, there's no specific form required for a contract of agency. But if the subject matter of the contract of agency is sale of a piece of land, it must be in writing, meaning the authority of the agent to sell that piece of land. That authority must be in writing. Otherwise, the sale itself is void. This is the rule under Article 1874 of the Civil Code. Note that it is not just the contract of agency that is void. It is the sale of the land itself that is void if the authority of the agent is not in writing. Okay, Article 1874 is directly applicable to problem number 2. So here is the suggested answer. No, the sale is not valid. Under the Civil Code, the sale of a piece of land through an agent is void if the latter's authority is not in writing. Here, Y's authority to sell X's house and lot was not in writing. X's verbal instruction to Y via a phone call, as well as Y's possession of the title, are not sufficient to make the sale valid, as these do not comply with the requirement of the Civil Code for the validity of such a sale. Hence, the sale is not valid. Note, though, that the sale of a piece of land is a special case where the contract itself becomes void if the authority of the agent is not in writing. Generally speaking, if the contract is unauthorized or entered into on behalf of another without the authority of the principal, that contract is unenforceable, but it is not necessarily void. An unenforceable contract cannot be enforced unless it is ratified, but a void contract cannot be ratified at all. Okay, that's just a quick recall of a related concept. Question number 3. This is about the classification of property and the susceptibility to acquisitive prescription. If you recall, the Civil Code provides for the classification of property based on ownership. In the case of the national government or the state, its properties are either of public dominion or patrimonial property. Property of public dominion is that belonging to the state for public use, public service, or the development of national wealth. I know that when reading this problem, the classification of lands under the Constitution probably came to mind. Under the Constitution, the term used is lands of the public domain, and forest land is one of its classifications. So, which classification should you use in answering this problem? Should you use the property of public dominion under the Civil Code or the lands of the public domain under the Constitution? Since this is a civil law subject, I guess it is better to use the classification under the Civil Code. Although the classification under the Constitution may be the first thing that you thought when you read forest land. Also note that there was a case where the Supreme Court clarified the nuance between property of public dominion under the Civil Code and lands of the public domain under the Constitution. This is the case of Republic versus Pasig Rizal. In that case, the Supreme Court clarified that lands of the public domain under the Constitution pertain to all lands owned or held by the state, both in its public and private capacities, whereas lands forming part of the public dominion under the Civil Code pertain only to those which are intended for public use, public service, or the development of national wealth, and it excludes patrimonial property. Just be aware that this distinction exists and apply this accordingly. For this problem, let's use the classification of state property under the Civil Code and combine it with the rule under Article 1113 of the Civil Code, which states that property of the state or any of its subdivisions, not patrimonial in character, shall not be the object of prescription. With this in mind, here is my suggested answer for question number 3. No, the claim of A is not meritorious. Under the Civil Code, property of public dominion is not susceptible to acquisitive prescription. It includes property of the state intended for public use, public service, or the development of national wealth, such as forest land. Here, the subject property is forest land. It is a property of public dominion which is not susceptible to acquisitive prescription. Notwithstanding A's occupation of a portion of the land, he cannot claim ownership by virtue of acquisitive prescription. Hence, A's claim is not meritorious. You may note how I stated my legal basis in this suggested answer. It's a combination of Articles 420 and 421 on the classification of property based on ownership, and Article 1113 on the rule that property of public dominion is not susceptible to acquisitive prescription. I guess it should be part of your practice in answering bar questions. Try to find ways to state your legal basis clearly and concisely. Question number 4 is about family relations. To answer this, we look at the provisions on marriage under the Family Code, specifically Articles 5, 26, and 35. Under Article 5, one of the essential requisites for the validity of marriage is the age of the contracting parties. It says that any male or female of the age of 18 years or upwards, not under any of the impediments mentioned in Articles 37 and 38, may contract marriage. Conversely, if the parties are below 18 years old, they cannot validly contract a marriage. In other words, the marriage will be void. And that effect is stated in Article 35 of the Family Code, which enumerates the marriages that are void from the beginning. Number 1, void ab initio marriage under Article 35 are those contracted by any party below 18 years of age, even with the consent of parents or guardians. In addition, we also need to look at Article 26, which provides for the rules on marriages solemnized outside the Philippines. The general rule under Article 26 is that if the marriage was solemnized in accordance with the laws of the foreign country where the marriage was solemnized, then the marriage is valid in the Philippines. But there are exceptions to this, one of which is when the parties are minors. Even if the marriage between minors is valid in a foreign country and Filipinos went there to get married, that marriage is still void under Philippine law. Just a related note, what if two Filipinos of the same sex go abroad to get married? What is the status of same-sex marriages between Filipinos abroad? A same-sex union of two Filipinos abroad is not even considered a contract of marriage under Philippine law. The Family Code does not recognize same-sex marriages even as a void marriage. There is no contract of marriage to speak of. It does not exist. If that's the case, the proper remedy is not a petition for the declaration of nullity of marriage, but a petition for the cancellation or correction of entries in the civil registry. So just note the distinction. With that, here is my suggested answer. Yes, B's petition for the declaration of nullity of her marriage with A will prosper. Under the Family Code, a marriage involving Filipinos below 18 years of age is void from the beginning, even if it is considered valid under the law of the country where the marriage was solemnized. Here, A and B were both Filipinos and below 18 years of age at the time of their marriage in Hong Kong. Under the Family Code, the marriage is void, even if valid under the laws of Hong Kong where it was solemnized. Since the marriage between A and B was void, B's petition for the declaration of its nullity will prosper. In this suggested answer, I tried to address all the relevant facts mentioned in the problem. First, both parties were Filipino. Second, they were both minors at the time of the marriage. Third, the marriage was solemnized in Hong Kong. And last, under the laws of Hong Kong, the legal age to get married is at least 15 years old. Question number 5 is about a co-owner's right of legal redemption, which is the right of a co-owner to redeem or to buy back from a third person the portion of a co-owned property that was sold by another co-owner. The key to answering this question is in Article 1620 of the Civil Code. Under Article 1620, a co-owner may exercise the right of redemption. It further stated that if the price of the alienation is grossly excessive, the redemptioner shall pay only a reasonable one. But this provision did not define what grossly excessive or what a reasonable price is. Thus, the courts can decide whether the 10 million selling price is grossly excessive as compared to the 3 million peso prevailing market value of A's share. Note the question. We are only asked whether B and C may go to court and ask for the reduction of the purchase price. We are not asked whether the 10 million is grossly excessive. So in the suggested answer, I will just address what is being asked in the question. Yes, B and C may go to court to request a reduction in the purchase price for exercising their legal right of redemption. Under the Civil Code, if a co-owner sells a portion of a co-owned property to a third person at a grossly excessive price, The other co-owners may exercise their right of redemption by paying only a reasonable price. What constitutes grossly excessive or reasonable price is a matter that may be addressed to the courts. Here, A sold his share in the co-owned property to X for 10 million pesos, or more than 3 times its prevailing market value of 3 million pesos. The determination of whether this price is grossly excessive and subject to reduction is a question to be resolved by the court. Thus, B and C may go to court for such a determination and the corresponding reduction in price if proper. However, Article 1619 also says that legal redemption is to be exercised upon the same terms and conditions stipulated in the contract. If you used Article 1619 as a legal basis, then the answer may be different, such that B and C may no longer go to court to ask for a reduction of the purchase price for the exercise of their right of redemption. And they must redeem under the same terms and conditions that X bought A's portion of the co-owned property. In other words, B and C must also purchase A's portion for 10 million pesos. Again, I cannot really say which answer is better. It still depends on how you argue or defend your answer. Thank you for listening, future attorneys. Keep studying smart and see you in the next episode of Decoding the 2025 Bar.